Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Tip of the Ice-Burgh podcast, your home for Pittsburgh Penguins news and analysis. You can find us on YouTube at Tip of the Ice-Burgh. Make sure you like, share, subscribe, all that fun stuff, or you can catch us anywhere you get your podcast from. I'm your host, Nick Belsky, joined as always by Nick Horwat. We got an important show for you guys today. All eyes are on the Pittsburgh Penguins medical reports, looking for Sidney Crosby updates. And when I say all eyes, not just in the city of Pittsburgh, I think there's an entire country north of us that is concerned about what is going on at UPMC Lemieux Sports Complex later today at practice. So we'll talk about the latest on Sidney Crosby's upper body injury, and then Marcus Pettersson getting real comfortable in his new home of Vancouver, signs an extension. We'll talk about what kind of team-friendly deal he laid out for Jim Rutherford and the Vancouver Canucks. And then, since this is our last full episode before the Four Nations face-off break, we'll share our three biggest surprises of the season so far. Let's get started on the Tip of the Ice-Burgh. And let's kick things off with the reason that a lot of people are going to be tuning in, especially if they're fans from north of the border. Sidney Crosby was injured in Tuesday night's game against the New Jersey Devils. He was sandwiched between Luke Hughes and Erik Haula in what looked to be just an awkward moment where his arm was stuck in there, but the rest of his body wasn't, and it just may have bent the wrong way. He left the game, missed about 10 minutes of game action, returned late to a thunderous applause from the PPG Paints Arena faithful, and then after the game just simply said, "I got tangled up." That's all Sidney Crosby would say as it pertains to his upper body injury. Well, the story and the plot thickened a little bit yesterday whenever he missed practice and is being evaluated for an upper body injury. This is what Mike Sullivan had to say yesterday as it pertains to Crosby's status moving forward. Quote, "I don't have any more specifics. Once we have more specifics, I will let you know." The Penguins practice later today, like I mentioned, before heading out on back-to-back games against Metropolitan Division foes, starting with the New York Rangers on Friday and then culminating with a matchup against the Philadelphia Flyers. Horwat, what is your concern level for this injury at this current moment?
It's pretty concerning. The Penguins are already down in Evgeny Malkin, and now you're taking away, possibly at least, taking away by far their best player on a team that doesn't have phenomenal center depth. Like I mentioned, Malkin's already out, so now you're taking Crosby out, and it's not an ideal situation. This close to the Four Nations hurts Team Canada, at least makes them kind of, get on edge a bit. Everyone was looking forward to what Crosby could do with some of the best players in the world that he has never played with yet. And we'll just see what happens. Maybe everything's okay. The Penguins had the night of assists last night, and from the usual team photos, it didn't look like there was anything to be wrong with his arm or hand or whatever it may be.
Yeah, he wasn't wearing a brace.
Exactly. But again, you can't take anything from that. I can remember a very similar situation so far, at least with Jeff Petrie a couple years ago. He got injured and looked like a pretty bad wrist injury. In the final minutes against the Buffalo Sabres, his arm got twisted up somewhere behind the net. He came right out into the post-game scrum, told the media he was doing good, should be back on the ice, practice tomorrow. And then he wasn't, and he was on the shelf for a couple of months. So far, it sounds like a similar situation to that. We'll see what the updates bring for the Penguins and Crosby this time around, but so far, I'd say the concern level is pretty high, especially considering he went from returning from the injury, finishing the game, to being evaluated. Normally, that's not ideal. We'll see what comes from it today at practice, though.
Yeah, I was encouraged that he came out because not only did he finish the game, it didn't look like there was anything that was kind of hindering him the remainder of that game, if it means anything, which you could have told, you could have figured it out if he was out there and all of a sudden he was just taking shots from one side and you could tell that he was not utilizing his entire move set, which is like his power move where he puts one hand up against the defender and then just goes around the other side. He was doing everything. It didn't seem like he had lost a step or was playing to kind of protect that arm. So to me, that was encouraging. But again, You mentioned the Jeff Petrie situation. I had it down here in my notes. I'm like, it's the same thing. You go home, the adrenaline stops pumping, and all of a sudden you sleep, and overnight that thing blows up. It could reveal that it's a little bit worse than initially thought. Also, let's not forget, Sidney Crosby is the same person that played through a core muscle injury for the simple fact that Evgeny Malkin wasn't going to be ready for the beginning of the season. So he played the first 17, and then he re-aggravated, made it worse, and ended up needing core muscle surgery. But he plays through stuff. That's Sidney Crosby. He's part of the old guard. He's going to play through anything, no matter if it's playoffs or game one. He's going to play through stuff. You're hoping that he doesn't, obviously. You're hoping that he takes as much time as he needs, even with the Four Nations face-off coming up, because let's just face it, I don't think this is a conversation. He is the most important player to the Pittsburgh Penguins. If you're somebody that wants to see them tank, this might be the only chance you get to see them finish in the top 5, because Sidney Crosby leads the team in points. He is currently heating up on a 5-game point streak, and he hasn't missed a game since April 7th of 2022, a current streak of 229 consecutive games played for the Penguins captain. This is a guy that has been consistent as consistent can be from the age of 35 to 37. And it's just unfortunate that that run had to come to an end because of such a incidental play where it just got caught.
Yeah. And I'm glad you mentioned the streak of health that he's been on, because I was going to throw that out there too. It's the longest streak of health he's been on in his career, ironically coming this late in his career. It is just an unfortunate situation that you just get tangled up like that. You just get caught at the wrong place, the wrong time, and the wrong sort of situation. It's less than ideal. The Penguins are going to need to hope for a quick recovery unless the idea is this team's just going to take a top 5 pick, because that's kind of what they're staring down right now. I mean, the season's already pretty bad, and it's not going to get – it might not even get any better if he's healthy and back in the lineup.
Yeah, that's true.
There's that part of it too. So we'll see what the Penguins decide to do. I mean, it's not looking like, for the Penguins overall for the rest of the season, regardless of Crosby's health, it's not looking positive though.
Yeah, the ironic thing is here, the last time Sidney Crosby missed a game, the Penguins went to MSG and lost 3-0. Penguins' next game, which would be the first game that he misses at the end of this stretch, is a game against the New York Rangers at MSG. But the last thing I want to talk about pertaining to this injury, because who knows what it is. It could end up being nothing. It could end up being something that they were afraid about, and it's just, okay, he's going to need a couple of weeks to just kind of iron things out. Who knows? We'll have to wait and see and wait for further evaluation to be concluded so they actually give us some injury updates that we can put our foot on and kind of understand. But when you look at the Four Nations face-off, Team Canada, as you mentioned, is probably pacing the corridors right now, which Kyle Dubas is part of that front office. So he's probably pacing at UPMC Lemieux Sports Complex, waiting for news from downstairs. With a lot of players starting to back out for whatever reason, do you think Crosby would play less than 100% for Team Canada next week and moving forward?
That's a very good question, actually. Because like I said, everyone was kind of looking forward to this idea of Crosby, McKinnon, McDavid, and the rest of that lineup playing together. But I was going to say, I bet he would just sit it out, because you'd want to, in a normal season, I'd say I bet he sits it out because you're focused on the Penguins, you're focused on the NHL, you're focused on competing for the Stanley Cup. In the Penguins situation, though, excuse me, it's tough to tell if they believe they can do that this year. Because if they do, yeah, he's absolutely going to sit it out and rehab for the season. However, if it's playable and the Penguins are like understanding that this season is not going anywhere, maybe he does. Also depends if it's playable. That's kind of the nuance of everything. If it's an unplayable injury for the next couple of weeks, forget it, obviously. But, I mean, I could see it because he's the captain of that team. He's the captain of Team Canada. He is he's one of the greatest Canadian athletes of all time. He means so much to that country. He understands that. I feel like he would maybe play at less than 100, but also with the understanding of you're gonna need to have someone ready to go. I mean, pretty quickly.
Yeah, I had the same thought. Not only that, but the Olympics are less than a calendar year away, are they not? So you can look forward to that for McKinnon and McDavid and Crosby on the same team. But why it's important to Team Canada, I mean, this team has underachieved the last couple of big international tournaments. World Juniors this year, World Juniors last year. You get Sidney Crosby on Team Canada, though, it gets pretty good for the Maple Leaf. According to the Sidney Crosby archives on Twitter, Sidney Crosby is 21-0 as Team Canada's captain, including an Olympic gold medal, a World Cup gold, and MVP, and IIHF gold medal. So he is the GOAT of not just hockey in general, but specifically as captain of Canada, undefeated. Shout out to the Sidney Crosby archives on Twitter. We'll wait for more news from Sidney Crosby, hopefully later today, as the Penguins practice at UPMC Lemieux Sports Complex before heading to the big city in New York. Let's talk a little bit here about Marcus Pettersson, former Pittsburgh Penguin now after last Friday's trade, wasting no time up in Vancouver, says, I'm going to sign my contract right now. We didn't talk about it in Pittsburgh. We're not only going to talk about it, but we're going to sign it in under a calendar week. 6 years, $5.5 million average annual value. Pettersson gets a full no movement clause for the first 3 years of his deal, a 15-team no trade clause in the last 3 years of his deal. Now that you see the contract, Horwat, begs the question, should the Penguins have signed Marcus Pettersson?
Probably not. Still no. Who knows where the Penguins are going in the next few years, genuinely. Marcus Pettersson is a very good defenseman, a sneaky puck mover, even without playing with Erik Karlsson, is a sneaky good puck mover from the blue line. He just deserves his chances to win. Now, toward the end of a 6-year deal, maybe the Penguins are back in winning shape, and maybe he would have been a part of it. But I think at the end of the day, not much is guaranteed in Pittsburgh right now, so I still would say no. This is probably what's best for the player and best for Marcus Pettersson and best for the Canucks as they try and retread a pretty turbulent, let's say, start to the season. And yeah, good for Marcus Pettersson. Great guy. I'm happy for him, and I think it's going to be a better situation for him than staying here through the muck of what is expected to come in the next few years.
Yeah, the Penguins are a rebuilding team, and I understand. This guy was your best defensive defenseman, and he's 28 years old, and he's still in the prime of his career. And for those who still want to see Sidney Crosby succeed, the best way to do that is to keep your best players, but they are a rebuilding team. You have to go back to this. Whatever phrase or plan that it's called, it's a rebuild. No matter the timeline, it's a rebuild. And in rebuilds, you have to trade away good players to help kind of restart and kickstart that next era of successful hockey. If this was 2 years ago and they were just coming off of that playoff series against the New York Rangers and they still felt that, hey, we still got a lot left in the tank. Sidney Crosby is 34 years old. Evgeny Malkin's only 35 years old. Same goes for Chris Letang. There's still a lot to look forward to. There's still a lot to lean on from that playoffs when they were up 3-1 in the series against the Rangers, despite having Louis Domingue in net. If that was the case, and you dropped 28-year-old Pettersson on an expiring deal into that season, yes, you sign him to this deal. But now, it just doesn't fit with the plan that was kicked off last March when Jake Gensel was traded. Everything has been in accordance to the same plan since that trade, and signing Marcus Pettersson, it just wouldn't have fit. It wouldn't make sense with that plan. Not to mention the fact that while, yes, Pettersson currently best defensive defenseman on the Penguins. Two things on that. One, it's not saying much. It's not saying much on a defense that is headlined by Chris Letang and Erik Karlsson, two players that at this stage of their career have very little interest in playing in their own zone. Much better of late, but in totality, not very much interest in playing in their own zone. So then you look at it and say any top 4 defenseman, any top 2 pairing defenseman in the NHL is going to come into Pittsburgh and would be the best defensive defenseman on the Pittsburgh Penguins. But secondly, it feels like Pettersson this season started to show some cracks. Last year, he was very good, despite being put in a weird situation where he was bounced between Karlsson and Letang. Who can he actually help the most? Who needs help the most? That's where Pettersson ended up going because they didn't have a second viable option. The years before that, after Dumoulin And up until this year, he was really good. This year, the cracks started to form a little bit, though. I don't know if it was having to play and make up for Erik Karlsson and Chris Letang that much, but his game wasn't as complete. His game wasn't as infallible as it had been the last couple of years. And you started to see those cracks show. I'm not saying he's not going to be a good defenseman for the next few years. I'm saying signing that defenseman who has shown some cracks this year to a 6-year deal, there's a little bit of nervousness that goes along with that. I still like the guy. I still think, as you've mentioned and everybody has mentioned since he got traded, one of the best humans in that locker room since he came to Pittsburgh. And I'm very happy that he got paid. But if I'm the Penguins in this situation, matched with the fact that he started to show those cracks, again, I agree. There is absolutely no way that I am signing him to a 6-year extension that has especially that many protections in it, a full no move clause, and then a 15-team no trade clause in the last 3 years.
Yeah, it's a tough deal it's a pretty big deal that the Penguins may not have even wanted to sign. All those clauses, all the clauses involved in that, all the years, really. Like I said, sure, the Penguins might be a good team again in 6 years, but what does this team look like in 6 years? Obviously, the main three are gone. Who amongst the prospect pool graduates well enough to prove that this team is a viable championship team? For what it's worth, who knows if in the next 6 years the Penguins are going to be that good of a team. And Marcus Pettersson can only do so much defensively when it comes to carrying a team. Again, it's not like this is the kind of player that you were going to look to carry your team into the future. He's a great player. He's going to play his role very, very nicely wherever he goes. But this isn't, no matter the situation of the team, Marcus Pettersson just bluntly isn't the kind of player you're throwing money and years at regardless of the situation. He isn't Sidney Crosby in the middle of a downfall, in the middle of the last few seasons. Here's a 2-year deal, Sid. Or, back whenever the Penguins did re-sign Malkin and Letang, maybe people would have said then, well, the Penguins are on the outs. Why are you handing them those deals? Well, for reasons. Up until pretty much this year, the Penguins seem to be going for it year after year. Mm-hmm. So it's just another. They sold last year with Jake Gensel, and that was kind of the proof then of they're not really attempting to make those signings right now. They're not trying to sign those deals.
Not only trading Jake Gensel, but not replacing him in the lineup should have been a clear indication of the direction that this team was going to go in this year.
Yeah, if they weren't going to talk things out with Jake Gensel and they weren't going to try and get no disrespect to Michael Bunting, but if they weren't going to try and get a better piece than Michael Bunting into that slot, then what made you think Marcus Pettersson was going to get that kind of deal? So it's probably better for the Penguins that they let him go to Vancouver to get that deal, and it's definitely better for Pettersson to go somewhere else and get that kind of contract.
Yeah, so I'm excited to see what Pettersson's able to do up there. Again, Vancouver much closer to the playoffs than the Pittsburgh Penguins. A lot of exciting players up there, including Quinn Hughes, who's just above him on that left side of defense. So we'll see what he's able to do up there. And for those who disagree, for those who are sitting here saying, man, that is such a team-friendly deal, you could have made it work, he's the only defensive defenseman the Penguins had, here's a small consolation for not having Pettersson. When Pettersson went out in December, the Penguins' penalty kill went from 9th to 7th. And in that time, they succeeded on 95% of their penalty kill opportunities. Since his return, they dropped from 7th to 17th and were only successful 67% of the time. Since he got traded now, 3 for 3, 100% of the time. So the Penguins are better on the penalty kill without Marcus Pettersson. That's the story the stats tell. Of course, I'm being very facetious here, but a weird little nugget that you look at and you say, the Penguins did have more success on the penalty kill this year without their best defensive defenseman. It's almost the same thing as saying they traded away their best defensive defenseman, then they had their first shutout of the entire season the next game. It's just weird happenings for the Pittsburgh Penguins this year.
It is, but such is this season. As I'm sure we'll discuss soon, this season has just been so strange, but also very not fun in certain ways. It's been a fascinating season that, it'll be tough to look back on this season happily, but it's been such a strange, just very odd season.
Yeah, they've been bad, but one thing you can't say is they have been entertaining. Like, you can't say they haven't been entertaining. They have been fully entertaining all season long with trades speckled through there, a lot of milestones coming up, some really interesting storylines that we'll talk about in our closing segment. But one last congratulations does go out to Marcus Pettersson before we close this thing out. Good person, deserves the contract, deserves to get paid, and he got that up in Vancouver with his old buddy, Jim Rutherford, who's still running circles, victory laps around his trade initially to get Marcus Pettersson for Daniel Sprong back a few years ago. So shout out to Marcus Pettersson. Well-deserved, well-earned. Let's close out this episode with a little look back here at the Pittsburgh Penguins season. This is our last recording before the end of the schedule and the beginning of the Four Nations break. It took me a second to get there, but I got there eventually. So what we're going to do is we are going to give our 3 biggest surprises of this Pittsburgh Penguins season so far. Let us know in the comment section below. What are your 3 biggest surprises looking back on this season so far? Horwat, I'm going to let you go first. Your 3 biggest surprises of the 2024-25 Penguins season leading up to the Four Nations face-off.
In full transparency, I'm not overly surprised by a lot that has happened this year.
Really?
I think going into the year, I think the expectations weren't high, so certain things weren't gonna necessarily blow me away. But I did manage to come up with 3 that are certainly just definitely head scratching. And the first one amongst them is Tristan Jarry's downfall. Now, again, you probably could have predicted it considering last season and the season before, and maybe even the season before that. But something about this year felt worse than the rest and just, again, very no good, no fun. I don't think I expected him to be sent to the minors on 2 occasions to try and rehash his game and to try and reset himself. And I just kind of think that's where the big surprise comes in. It's just the idea that he genuinely, if he was on his game, genuinely could have been in that Team Canada conversation for the Four Nations face-off. We saw the goalies that they went with. They didn't even give Logan Thompson a call. Shocking.
Stupid.
Very dumb. But if Tristan Jarry was on his game and playing at the level that people believed he could have been in that kind of conversation. But instead, he's puttering around in the AHL, trying to find himself again. And that is probably the most stunning part of the season, is just the fact that the downfall got bad enough that he had to get sent to the AHL to kind of recuperate. The second one is I really didn't expect the power play to click this much. I mean, it was bad last year, and anything better would have been, a step in the right direction, and it couldn't have gotten any worse. But it's 6th in the league right now.
Yeah.
I don't think I expected that. I think I obviously expected steps forward, maybe into, it was 32nd last year?
I believe 32nd or 31st. It was them and the Capitals that were just battling it out for the last spot.
Yeah, I was expecting maybe in the around 20, maybe 15. Maybe they could sneak into the top 10 somehow, like 10 or 11. But 6, and they're way out of the playoff spot.
Mm-hmm.
That's quite surprising. And the third one, it was a bit of a toss-up. I'm going to go with, I didn't expect the record, or at least the vibes around the team, to be this bad. I know the record on paper doesn't look overly terrible. As I take time to pull it up, at where are we? 22, 24, and 9 overtime losses. But only 4 points up on the Buffalo Sabres for last in the East. Again, on paper, it's not a totally terrible record, but it's under 500 and just well below A, what we expected, and B, just the vibes around the team are way worse than what this record would say. So I think that's another thing that I'm a little surprised at, is just how down bad this team has gotten this year.
Yeah, that is obviously a stark contrast to what we expected. Now, here's the thing. We didn't expect them to be a bona fide playoff team. We didn't expect them to be sitting in a playoff spot, sitting pretty, and saying, hey, listen, all we have to do is play our game and we'll be in the playoffs. The question becomes, who do we face? That wasn't going to be the case for the Pittsburgh Penguins in 2024-25. But to have them be in a conversation, an honest conversation about, well, can they get into the top 5? They're certainly a top 10 draft pick this year, but can they get into the top 5, I think that's where the surprise comes. I don't think I had this discussion yesterday on Tip of the Ice-Burgh Live. I don't think it is so far below expectation that it puts Mike Sullivan on the hot seat, because that's going to start to become a conversation once again. But I do think it's lower than expectation. I don't think I expected other teams to be as good as they are. I didn't expect Columbus to be in the fight for the playoffs. I didn't expect the Ottawa Senators to be as good as they are whenever they have good goaltending. I didn't expect the Detroit Red Wings, the Montreal Canadiens to have the seasons that they're having. I certainly didn't expect the Washington Capitals to all of a sudden be a President's Trophy contending team once again. But I agree with you. It is a little surprising, the overall vibe of this team, especially considering Crosby's still performing well, and you're getting career years out of your best 2 wingers right now. Like Brian Rust, Rickard Rakell, both on pace for a career high in goals. Rust, by the way, on pace right now for 30-goal season. We'll see if he can continue. Rickard Rakell on pace for 36, which blows away his previous career high. And both of them are on pace to either tie or surpass their career high in points. Rust is on pace to have a 60-point season for the first time in his career. Rickard Rakell is on pace to tie his career high with 69 points. So with that in mind, yeah, it's a little surprising that the rest of the team isn't good enough to even have them in that bubble conversation right now, because I don't think they are. They need to do work to get into the conversation to be into the playoff bubble. And I think that is 100% surprising to me. I went with, to be completely honest, I went with 2 of your 3, but I had extras just in case this happened. The power play I did have on here, but mine was specifically the fact that the split power play is working, and not just working, like you mentioned, working well. You have to give credit where credit is due, and credit is due to David Quinn and the Penguins coaching staff. I understand that it's a collective effort, but he's the guy that right now has the title, right? How much did we bash on Todd Reirden last year, even though it was Mike Sullivan too, it was Ty Hennis too, it was the players too who gave input, and you know you're going to take that input whenever it's future Hall of Famers. But David Quinn is spearheading this effort, and the fact and the decision that he said, Crosby, top power play, with Matt Grzelcyk. Second unit is going to be Letang, Karlsson, Malkin. You guys can go play and have second unit, second fiddle. And it's worked. They've not been really a unit 1, unit 2. It's maybe been unit A, unit B, unit 1A, unit 1B, whatever you want to call it. It's been very even. But Matt Grzelcyk on the power play 1 with Sidney Crosby and Brian Rust has been the 3 kind of constants on that unit. Extremely, extremely good. And I think the logic is simple. Get the puck on Crosby's stick more often. How bad of an idea could that be, right? It's a good idea. It's been working, and the split power play has been a big surprise, because we actually came on this show on December 21st, right after we had heard that this was going to happen, and we said, this is not a sustainable solution. Why would you take 4 future Hall of Famers and split them up on the power play? And that way, I'm kind of an old-time thinker where I say, this is power play unit 1, this is power play unit 2, and if you don't have a good first power play, it doesn't matter. But it's been working. Since December 20th, the Penguins have the 5th best power play in the National Hockey League, and season long, like you mentioned, 6th best in the National Hockey League. So I agree with you. The power play has been one of the biggest revelations of this entire season. The fact that it's in that fashion, splitting up your stars, that to me, it makes it even more surprising. But outside of that, Owen Pickering has been one of the biggest surprises of this year. I didn't expect him to make his NHL debut this season, let alone make his debut, get more than a cup of coffee at the NHL level, and look good in top pairing minutes. How many times did he play over 20 minutes a game and nobody batted an eye? Everybody just said, yeah, that fits. That works. The kid played up and down the lineup. I think the kid also played on the right side for a couple of games. He just does anything the coaching staff asks of him, and that's why they like him, and that's why he has success at the age of 20, playing a very difficult position of top-line left-shot defenseman on the opposite end of Chris Letang. So I'm very impressed with Owen Pickering. He went down to the AHL. He's getting a little bit more seasoning, and he had a couple of nice moments at the AHL All-Star game. So Owen Pickering, to me, I think if you're talking about surprises, he has to be on the short list. And the last one that I'll get to here before we just kind of bounce back and forth, Jesse Puljujärvi not getting a real chance with this organization. He was the best player in the preseason, bar none. Now, of course, Sidney Crosby didn't need to be the best player in the preseason, so he didn't play very much. And he didn't, when he played, how much effort are you really giving? Same thing goes with Malkin, Karlsson, who was injured at that point, and Chris Letang. It's like, okay, it's the preseason. You can kind of just get up to speed. You're not trying to earn anything. Jesse Puljujarvi knew coming in that he would have to earn every single shift that he is given at this level. And he earned it. He was great in the preseason, got the opportunity on the third line to start the season. And since then, 26 games played, a boatload of healthy scratches. And just yesterday, sent back down to the AHL level after passing through waivers a few weeks ago. It's just shocking to me that a guy that has size, that has good skating ability, that has great offensive instincts, that likes to play physical, can't find a spot in Mike Sullivan's lineup more consistently. A former 4th overall pick that I think still has it. And that's the thing. When he plays, it looks like he still has it. But for some reason, I don't know if it's the Juuso Riikola effect. Everybody likes him except for that coaching staff. And that's the case with Jesse Puljujarvi. So those are my 3 after your 3 is the fact that it's a split power play, Owen Pickering, and the lack of opportunity for Jesse Puljujarvi in Pittsburgh.
You're definitely right about Owen Pickering. I had honestly kind of forgot, but that's mostly because he's not on the NHL roster right now, so it kind of slipped my mind a bit. But when it comes to Jesse Puljujarvi, I thought of that, thought of the exact same thing. I'm surprised he's not getting more playing time. And then I really, really looked at it. I'm not surprised at all. You look at the kind of run he had last year, it was the same thing. He's here, excuse me, he's here, he's playing, now he's not. And now he's not really getting any time at all. He's getting, the short end of the stick night after night. And not only that, you look at, regardless of how he did in the preseason, you look at the lineup that the Penguins are trotting out right now. You look at the depth that Kyle Dubas built, and by depth, I do mean 4 third lines, essentially.
Yeah.
Where is Puljujarvi fitting into that? And not only that, you look at the AHL lineup. I mean, there's a bunch of guys down there that have NHL potential / experience. That includes Rutger McGroarty. Tristan Brose is going to have that NHL potential. Koivunen is going to have that potential. Then there's Jonathan Gruden down there who hasn't gotten any NHL time this year. There's Emil Bemstrom who hasn't gotten any NHL time this year. Sam Poulin was up for a cup of coffee. Seems like, again, NHL experience. Where amongst all these names was he going to fit? It's not surprising to see that he's getting pushed to the back of the line while other depth guys get their shot at the lineup.
Yeah. Where is he going to fit? I would say the 4th line.
Yeah.
I would say the 4th line. I would say the insistence that Drew O'Connor played over him when Drew O'Connor was at his worst was not good. I would say the insistence that Nola Chari stayed in the lineup. Now, after the fact that we've seen Matt Nieto specifically. Achari, there's a lot of different circumstances with Nola Chari, but with Matt Nieto, we've seen him now out of the lineup for the majority of the last handful of games.
Yeah.
And they've had plenty of names for the penalty kill. They've had options for the penalty kill. That was my thing. I was saying, okay, well, Puljujarvi's not going to get in for Nieto because they need somebody to kill penalties on the forward side of things. Boko Imama doesn't kill penalties. I'm not saying that I don't like what I've seen out of Boko Imama. I'm just saying, if you can put Imama in that position, why earlier this season was there such an insistence that Matt Nieto get opportunity after opportunity when Jesse Puljujarvi doesn't? I would say that if you were not worried about the penalty kill time, then Puljujarvi should have been in over Nieto. That's what I was arguing back then is, well, Nieto's out there because he kills penalties and Puljujarvi doesn't. But now that we see that's not a factor, what was the deal? And that's my thing. It felt like he was very good and earned an opportunity early in the season. And it seemed like after that, the Penguins gave no leeway to a young guy who still has a lot of gas left in the tank in a season that didn't really mean much in the grand scheme of things. In a season that, you wanted to go for it, but you should have known from, once you got to November and you finally turned it around, you should have had an idea of like, okay, we should probably let some of these guys get some leeway here. We should let some of these young guys get some runway here. And I understand Mike Sullivan is not coaching in a rebuilding mindset. He is coaching to win every single game, every night. He always says it. I'm going to put the lineup out there that best gives us an opportunity to win a game. He just didn't believe it was Jesse Puljujarvi. I'm just surprised that his opportunity stalled out at 26 games played. A quarter of a season after all the fanfare last year, after all of the praise that he got all offseason long, all of the praise that he got all preseason long, it resulted in a quarter of a season before they said, you know what? Matt Nieto deserves more of an opportunity right now because that's where we're going to go with it. So that's my big thing on Puljujarvi. I did want to mention about Tristan Jarry because that was 1.1. I think that is, to me, the biggest surprise. I understand that he had his stock slowly deteriorating year over year, especially late last season when he couldn't wrestle the net back from Nedeljkovic in a meaningless game 82. But the way and the lengths at which he fell off the cliff this year, to me, could not have been predicted. If you say you predicted it, you're a flat out liar and you're just dancing on a grave. Nobody could have expected that he's going to spend two stints at the American Hockey League, including one that is being called by the general manager a, quote, full reset. I mean, Kyle Dubas said on the GM show with Josh Getzoff that we looked at him and said, kind of take this as if you're in your early 20s just getting to the AHL. That is so far beyond what you should have expected for Tristan Jarry, even if you didn't have high expectations. I think that, to me, if we had to pinpoint, we've talked about 6 or 7 surprises here, your top 3, my top 3, that is the biggest surprise of this season is Tristan Jarry.
By far. And those are straight up not words you want to hear your GM say about a 2-time All-Star.
About a goalie he signed to a 6-year or 5-year deal or whatever it was, yeah.
Yeah, and again, we can look at that contract however we want, but the fact that those were earned 2-time All-Stars too. He earned those at that time. About your starting goalie that genuinely would have given you a chance to win that playoff series against the Rangers if he was healthy. Genuinely would have. That, again, you can say what you want about that contract, and we will say whatever we want about it, but those are not the words you want to hear come out of your GM's mouth when discussing that kind of contract, that kind of player, and that kind of, honestly, like the expectations for him. That sort of pedestal that he's been on before. And now it's, imagine you're treated as if you're getting into the league again. He's already an accomplished goalie.
Yeah. Regardless
of what happens going forward. He's already pretty accomplished in getting the Penguins to the playoffs a couple of times, getting to the All-Star game a couple of times. That is just straight up not good to hear from your GM, who, again, has tried to trade him, but, I mean, who wants it at this point?
Yeah. So your 3 biggest surprises were Tristan Jarry's collapse, the power play success, and the overall vibe of the team through 56 games, 55 games, depending on whenever you're watching this. My 3 were the fact that they split up the power play and it worked. Owen Pickering's emergence and Jesse Puljujarvi not getting a chance. I did have one more here I want to throw out before we go. Matt Grzelcyk, Erik Karlsson as a pairing. Again, something else that I was dead wrong about, and I will admit it. I said that was nightmare fuel material whenever that happened in mid-December. But not only are they both playing much better in the defensive zone together, it's getting the best offensively out of Erik Karlsson. Before they made that adjustment, Erik Karlsson had 19 points in 32 games, which is a 48-point pace. Since that move was made, Karlsson has 17 points in 23 games played, which is a 61-point pace. All of that by simply putting somebody that we were all saying to fire into the sun next to Erik Karlsson in mid-December. You got to give credit again to David Quinn, Mike Sullivan, and the Penguins coaching staff. So a lot of surprising moments, a lot of surprises to this point in the season for the Pittsburgh Penguins. Like I mentioned earlier, let us know in the comment section what your 3 biggest surprises were of the Penguin season up to this point. But that's going to do it for this episode of the Tip of the Ice-Burgh. Thank you guys so much for tuning into this one. Remember, you can find us on YouTube at Tip of the Ice-Burgh. Make sure you like, share, subscribe, tell all your friends, or you can catch us anywhere you get your podcast from. We'll see you guys next time.